My husband texted, "I want a divorce." All communication through my lawyer. My one-word reply was, "Understood." Then I systematically dismantled the financial life we had built over 15 years. 72 hours later, his lawyer was frantically calling, accusing me of leaving him destitute. But the real shock came when a furious phone call revealed he wasn't just leaving me, he was leaving me for my own sister. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee usually signaled the gentle start of my day, a comforting prelude to the meticulously structured chaos of an accountant's life. For 15 years, Mark and I had shared this ritual, each morning unfolding with a predictable rhythm. My shower, his half-hearted attempt at the crossword, our quiet breakfast, then the shared drive to the city. It wasn't a marriage of fiery passion, perhaps, but one built on a quiet companionship, a comfortable silence that I had mistaken for peace. Today, however, that peace shattered, not with a bang, but with the quiet, insidious vibration of my phone on the kitchen counter. I was spooning Greek yogurt into a bowl, half listening to the local news anchor drone on about traffic, when the screen lit up. A message from Mark. My thumb, still sticky from honey, slid across the display. "I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer." The words were stark, cold, devoid of any preamble, any emotion. They hung in the air, digital shards piercing the mundane normalcy of my morning. Divorce, 15 years, just like that, delivered via text. A choked gasp caught in my throat, a physical blow to my chest. The yogurt bowl slipped, clattering against the counter, but I barely registered the mess. My gaze was fixed on those 10 brutal words. My husband of 15 years, the man I had built a life with, reduced our entire shared existence to a legal instruction. A strange, almost primal clarity descended upon me. The initial wave of raw, gut-wrenching pain, the betrayal, the disbelief, the sheer humiliation, was quickly, brutally, supplanted by something colder, sharper. It was a switch flipping inside my brain, an emergency protocol activating. My hands, which had been trembling, steadied. My breath, shallow and ragged, deepened into something slow and deliberate. My fingers, moving of their own accord, typed a single curt response. Understood. There was no negotiation, no pleading, no questions. Mark had set the terms of engagement, and I, Carolyn, the methodical accountant, understood them perfectly. He wanted war by proxy, so be it. The comfortable, complacent woman who had woken up this morning was gone, incinerated by those 10 words. In her place stood someone new, someone with an icy resolve. My mind, usually occupied with spreadsheets and tax codes, began to race, calculating, strategizing. First, the practicalities, the joint accounts, his supplementary credit cards, the emergency fund we'd painstakingly built. It wasn't a matter of spite. Not yet. It was pure, unadulterated self-preservation. He had made it clear. He was severing ties. Very well. I would sever them too, but with precision. I walked to my home office, the scent of fresh coffee now mingling with the metallic tang of fear and fury. My hands flew over the keyboard, logging into banking portals, canceling, freezing, transferring. Every digital click was a decisive hammer blow, severing a financial tether that had bound us for a decade and a half. His personal credit card, canceled. Access to the joint savings, restricted. All lines of credit that might allow him to deplete our shared resources, frozen. I moved with a speed and efficiency I hadn't known I possessed, driven by the stark realization that 15 years of my life, 15 years of shared dreams and sacrifices, had just been wiped clean by a digital message. I needed to protect myself, to build a fortress around what was left, before the debris of our shattered marriage could bury me whole. The hum of the computer faded into the silence of the room, leaving only the faint thrum of my own racing pulse. The digital battle was over. For now, My fingers hovered over the keyboard, still tingling from the adrenaline. It was done. All access points to our joint finances, all avenues Mark could exploit, were sealed shut. A strange cocktail of exhaustion and a grim satisfaction washed over me. The pain hadn't vanished. It merely receded, replaced by a steely awareness of my own agency. For the first time in 15 years, perhaps even longer, I felt an undeniable surge of control. It was a cold, sharp feeling, like the edge of a freshly sharpened blade. But it was mine. The next morning, the urgency remained. I couldn't afford to wallow. My first call was to Brenda, a trusted colleague who had once mentioned her divorce attorney was a lioness in tailored suits. Miss Albright. The name itself promised formidable competence. Within hours, I had an appointment. Her office was exactly as I'd imagined. Minimalist, sophisticated, radiating an aura of quiet power. Miss Albright herself was impeccably dressed, her eyes sharp and intelligent. Missing nothing. I laid out the bare facts. The text, my immediate response, the financial lockdown. As I spoke, detailing each step, her gaze never wavered. When I finished, a tense silence filled the room. "Carolyn," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You did exactly what you needed to do. Most people freeze. You acted. That's a powerful position to be in." Her validation was a balm. A professional affirmation that what I'd dismissed as a desperate, knee-jerk reaction was, in fact, a strategic move. "Your instincts are commendable. We've bought ourselves crucial time and protected your assets from immediate depletion." We spent the next few hours poring over documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds. My accounting background, usually a source of dry satisfaction, now became my shield. I meticulously flagged every anomaly, questioned every joint expense, every transfer of funds. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach as the full weight of my financial vulnerability, juxtaposed with Mark's sudden, inexplicable detachment, began to sink in. Despite the initial surge of control, the landscape of my future still loomed, vast and uncertain. Could I rebuild? Could I truly stand on my own? Yet, with each document we scrutinized, a fresh wave of empowerment countered the fear. This wasn't just about dividing assets. It was about understanding the entire fabric of our shared life, and seeing it, for the first time, through an objective, almost forensic lens. The deeper we delved, the more I understood the necessity of my swift actions. A premonition, perhaps, had guided my hand that morning. Mark had always been lax with money, quick to spend, slower to save. There had been subtle red flags over the years. Small inconsistencies in his explanations, a casual disregard for budgets I'd carefully crafted. I'd always dismissed them as part of his carefree nature, a balance to my own meticulousness. Now, I saw them as precursors, subtle whispers of a deeper financial recklessness, or worse, a deliberate intent. My protective instinct, honed over years of managing finances, had screamed at me to cut him off. And in Miss Albright's office, with the weight of paper evidence between us, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had been right. The quiet hum of my newly resecured life lasted exactly 72 hours. At the office, amidst the familiar organized chaos of ledgers and tax forms, I found a strange solace in the methodical rhythm of my work. My focus was a shield, deflecting the lingering tremors of the past few days. Brenda, my colleague, passed my cubicle with a cheerful, "Morning, Carolyn. Got those Q3 reports ready to roll?" I managed a small, practiced smile. "Almost there, Brenda, just tying up a few loose ends." David, my boss, stopped by later, complimenting my efficiency on a particularly complex audit. I nodded, professional and composed, a perfect facade. Inside, a coiled spring of tension remained, but I was determined not to let it show. That afternoon, Miss Albright's name flashed across my phone. I excused myself to an empty conference room, a prickle of anticipation and dread running down my spine. "Carolyn," Her voice was crisp, lacking her usual measured calm. "Mr. Davies just called. He's incandescent." A grim satisfaction, cold and sharp, flickered within me. So, Mark had noticed, he'd been cut off. The consequence of his actions, finally, was dawning on him. And what, precisely, has provoked such a fervent reaction? I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the internal tremors. "He's demanding you reinstate all his credit cards, unfreeze the joint accounts, and transfer a substantial sum for his immediate expenses. He's calling it financial abuse and punitive behavior." Miss Albright paused, then added, a dry note entering her tone. "He apparently believes you're obligated to continue supporting his lifestyle, despite his unilateral decision to end the marriage." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, picturing Mark's indignation, the entitled anger that must have flared when he realized his usual easy access to funds was gone. It was almost comical. Almost. "My understanding was that Mark wished all communication to go through his lawyer," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "That instruction came directly from him. I am simply adhering to his wishes. Perhaps Mr. Davies should remind his client of the terms he set." Miss Albright chuckled. A short, sharp sound. Precisely what I told him. He then threatened an emergency hearing for spousal support. An emergency hearing. The words felt weighty, official. I pictured a sterile courtroom, a stern judge, and myself, laid bare before the law. But the fear was quickly eclipsed by a surge of incredulity. For spousal support? After 15 years of times managing our finances, my income largely sustaining us, and his decision to unilaterally divorce me via text message? On what grounds? He's claiming he's been left destitute and unable to maintain his standard of living due to your actions, Miss Albright explained, the scorn evident in her voice. Standard playbook. He'll paint you as a vengeful wife. He, the innocent party blindsided by your financial machinations. We'll receive the official filing soon. This will likely be within the next few days. The reality of it hit me. This wasn't just a breakup, it was a formal declaration of war, played out in the cold, unfeeling arena of the legal system. Mark, who had spent his days pursuing vague business opportunities that rarely materialized into profit, whose contributions to our shared life had always been more theoretical than tangible, now sought to leverage the law to continue draining my resources. The audacity was breathtaking. For 15 years, I had quietly managed our joint accounts, balanced the budget, and saved for our future, often making up for his financial lapses. His idea of maintaining a standard of living translated directly to my work, my income, my careful planning. And now, he wanted the court to enforce it. The familiar knot of dread tightened again. But this time it was tempered by a fierce, unyielding resolve. This was no longer about hurt or even betrayal. This was a battle for my financial future, my autonomy, my very sense of self-worth. If he wanted to fight dirty, if he wanted to exploit the system, then so be it. I had Miss Albright. I had the truth. And I had my unwavering determination. This wasn't going to be easy, but I knew, with absolute clarity, that I wouldn't back down. The battle had officially begun. The summons for the emergency hearing arrived with brutal efficiency. A stark white envelope containing the formal declaration of Mark's perceived destitution. Just 3 days later, I found myself in a small, nondescript courtroom. The air thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee. A palpable tension hanging between the two sides of the aisle. Miss Albright sat beside me, a bastion of calm competence, her notes meticulously arranged. Across the room, Mark sat slouched next to Mr. Davies. He looked different, not the neatly put-together Mark I had known, but a caricature of a man undone. His suit rumpled, his hair unkempt, his eyes wide and mournful. It was a performance, I realized with a jolt, designed to solicit sympathy. Mr. Davies, predictably, launched into a dramatic recounting of Mark's sudden financial hardship, painting me as a vengeful wife who had callously cut off her husband, leaving him with nothing. He spoke of Mark's right to maintain his accustomed standard of living, despite the fact that I Times had always been the primary breadwinner. I Times had managed the budgets, and I Times had painstakingly built the financial stability he now claimed was his due. Mark himself took the stand, his voice trembling as he spoke of betrayal and abandonment, detailing ludicrous expenses, a new car, lavish dinners, an exotic vacation, as if they were necessities I was obligated to fund. His eyes, when they met mine, held a strange blend of resentment and a thinly veiled plea. But the judge, a stern-faced woman with an aura of no-nonsense authority, was not easily swayed by theatrics. She listened patiently, interjecting with sharp, pertinent questions that sliced through Mark's embellished narrative. "Mr. Peterson?" she asked, her voice dry. "You state Miss Peterson unilaterally ended financial support. Was it not your Times instruction that all communications cease and be handled exclusively through counsel?" Mark stammered, caught in his own trap. "And prior to this, what was your personal financial contribution to the marital assets you now claim rightful access to?" The questions continued, each one highlighting the gaping holes in his story, exposing the fragility of his claims. When the judge finally delivered her decision, the words were precise, unyielding. She acknowledged my prompt action to secure marital assets following Mark's explicit instructions. She pointed out Mark's failure to present any compelling evidence of immediate, unsupportable hardship that wasn't a direct result of his own choices. His extravagant demands were denied, save for a small, temporary allowance for essential living expenses, a fraction of what he had sought, and clearly designated as an advance against future asset division. A quiet, almost imperceptible wave of satisfaction washed over me. It was vindication, a confirmation that logic and prudence could prevail over entitled self-pity. Mr. Davies' face was a mask of defeated indignation, while Mark simply stared, his carefully constructed facade of victimhood crumbling, revealing a flash of raw, childish fury. Yet, beneath the triumph, a flicker of bewilderment persisted. Mark's desperation was so profound, so utterly out of character for the man who usually glided through life with an air of effortless entitlement. It wasn't just the divorce. There was a frantic edge to his behavior, a sense of urgency that went beyond simply wanting to be free. As Miss Albright escorted me out of the courthouse, her hand gently on my arm, my mind began to replay the past few months, searching for answers. His sudden detachment, the way he'd started spending evenings away from home, initially attributed to new business meetings. His growing secretiveness about his phone, once openly displayed on the coffee table, now clutched tightly or face down. The expensive new watch he'd bought himself, a purchase he'd waved off with a vague, "got a bonus from a client." I had dismissed these as signs of a man growing distant, perhaps unhappy, leading to the inevitable end. But now, seen through the lens of his frantic, almost panicked need for money, they began to morph into something more sinister. These weren't merely symptoms of a failing marriage. They were the subtle, insidious indicators of a deeper truth, a narrative I had yet to uncover. I realized then that his sudden departure wasn't just about him wanting out. It was about him needing times out, urgently, before something else, something far larger and more damaging, came to light. The emergency hearing might have been a small victory, but it also unveiled the first faint, unsettling inklings that the game had far more players and much higher stakes than I had ever imagined. The unsettling inklings had barely begun to settle into a coherent thought when the next seismic shock hit. It was Sunday afternoon, 2 days after the hearing, and I was trying to find some semblance of normalcy, tending to my small balcony garden. My phone vibrated, an unknown number flashing across the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me. "Hello?" I said, a slight tremor in my voice. A shrill, furious voice ripped through the line. "You cold-hearted bitch, how could you do this to him?" It was Jessica, my sister. Her voice was laced with such venom, such pure, unadulterated rage, that for a moment, I was stunned into silence. How could you cut him off? He has nothing. You ruined him. Her words were a torrent of accusations, each one sharper than the last, blaming me for Mark's supposed destitution, for his humiliation in court, for everything. I tried to interrupt, to ask what she was talking about. But she wasn't listening. Her tirade escalated, fueled by a self-righteous anger that baffled me. He loves me, Carolyn. He chose times me asterisk. And you're just trying to destroy everything he has left, just because he finally found happiness away from you. The world, which had already been wobbling on its axis, suddenly tilted violently, plunging into an abyss. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering softly on the wooden deck, but I barely noticed. Asterisk. He loves me. He chose me. Asterisk. The words echoed, reverberated, transforming the blood in my veins into ice. My own sister, my husband, together. The gut-wrenching realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing my breath, searing my mind. My stomach churned, a sickening twist of nausea and disbelief. Every memory, every casual touch, every shared laugh between them, now replayed in my mind like a grotesque silent film, imbued with a horrifying new meaning. The subtle changes in Mark, his secretiveness, his desperate need for money, it all clicked into place. A monstrous jigsaw puzzle finally complete. The pain was immediate, visceral. A depth of betrayal I hadn't thought possible. It wasn't just a husband who had left me. It was my sister who had conspired with him, shattering not just my marriage, but the very foundation of my family. Then, from the depths of that abyss, something cold and sharp began to coalesce. Not grief, not even just pain, but fury, a consuming glacial fury that froze the trembling in my hands and sharpened my focus. This wasn't merely infidelity. This was a calculated, heinous act of sabotage by two people I had trusted implicitly. Jessica, my own blood, had chosen to align herself with the man who had discarded me via text message. The initial shock gave way to a chilling clarity. This was no longer just about a divorce settlement. This was about justice. This was about exposing a truth so ugly, so profoundly twisted, that it demanded to be brought into the light. My hands still shook, but my voice was steady when I called Miss Albright. It was late, but I knew she would answer. Miss Albright, I began. Skipping any pleasantries? We have new information. Very disturbing information. My sister, Jessica, just called me, and she implicated herself with Mark. I could hear a sharp intake of breath on the other end. She said Mark loves her, that he chose her. I paused, letting the full weight of the words hang in the air. This isn't just about a divorce anymore. This is about a premeditated affair between my husband and my sister, and I believe it's tied to his financial desperation. There was a moment of silence, then Miss Albright's voice, now devoid of any trace of weariness, tightened with grim resolve. Carolyn, she said, come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. We're going to expand our investigation. Significantly, the next morning, the sterile precision of Miss Albright's office felt less like a battleground and more like a war room. The shocking revelation of Jessica's involvement had irrevocably altered the landscape of my divorce. Gone was the stunned, defensive posture. It had been incinerated, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. I was no longer merely a wife fighting for a fair settlement. I was a woman betrayed, and I intended to fight for justice. This wasn't just a legal separation anymore. It was a righteous quest to expose a heinous conspiracy. Miss Albright, her expression grim but resolute, met my gaze across her polished desk. Carolyn, she began, her voice low and steady. What you experienced yesterday, the betrayal by your own sister, is beyond comprehension. But it also gives us a crucial advantage. This is no longer just a messy divorce. This is potentially fraud, possibly criminal. I want to go on the offensive, I stated, the words firm, leaving no room for doubt. I don't just want to protect myself. I want them to pay for what they've done, both of them. The anger, cold and sharp, was a powerful fuel. It propelled me forward, hardening my resolve into something unbreakable. Miss Albright nodded slowly. Precisely. And to do that, we need incontrovertible proof. My recommendation is a full forensic financial investigation. We need to trace every cent, every transaction, every movement of money between Mark and Jessica. We need to establish a clear pattern of financial misconduct and conspiracy. The idea resonated with a chilling clarity. My accounting background, usually focused on legitimate businesses, now felt like a secret weapon against the very people who had sought to destroy me. I felt a renewed, almost fierce, determination. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about tearing down the carefully constructed facade of lies they had built. It wasn't just about the money, though that was a critical component. It was about exposing the truth, stripping away their deceit, and ensuring they face the full consequences of their actions. I agree, I replied, my voice steady. Tell me what you need. Every bank statement, every credit card bill, every investment record. I'll gather it all. And so began the meticulous, excruciating process of sifting through the wreckage of my past. Back at my apartment, the sanctuary I was trying to build, I plunged into boxes of old files, digital archives, and forgotten folders. Each document was a relic of a life I thought I knew. A life that now felt like a carefully constructed deception. Bank statements, joint and individual, mortgage payments, utility bills, investment portfolios, tax returns stretching back a decade. I laid them all out, spread across my dining table, transforming it into a dizzying mosaic of my married life. Every number, every date, every recipient of a transfer, now held a new, sinister weight. I meticulously cross-referenced, highlighted and flagged. Was this withdrawal truly for home repairs? Or did it coincide with a sudden influx of cash into Jessica's account? Did that large unexplained expense align with Mark's business trips? My accountant's eye, once a source of professional pride, now became a magnifying glass, focusing on the intimate details of my own betrayal. The emotional toll was immense. Each page I turned was a fresh wound, a reminder of the years I had spent building a life with a man who was actively dismantling it behind my back. Aided and abetted by my own sister, I would find myself staring blankly at a receipt for a romantic dinner, remembering the exact conversation, the false sense of intimacy, only to now see it tainted by the knowledge of his deceit. I saw holiday photos, shared smiles, moments of what I believed was genuine affection, and felt a chilling void where trust once stood. It was like living through a distorted, nightmarish highlight reel of my own life, re-edited with a soundtrack of lies. My hands would tremble as I held a joint account statement, remembering the hopeful discussions about retirement or a future home. Knowing now that he was already planning a future with someone else, using our shared resources. The sheer volume of evidence, innocent on its own, but deeply insidious when viewed through the lens of their betrayal, was overwhelming. Yet, with every painful discovery, my resolve only hardened. The deeper I delved into the lie, the stronger my determination became to unearth every single piece of its ugly truth. It was late one evening, my apartment bathed in the pale glow of my desk lamp, surrounded by a fortress of documents, when a specific entry on an old bank statement snagged my attention. A transfer, marked investment, dated nearly 2 years ago. Not large enough to be alarming on its own, but what followed, or rather, what times didn't follow, was the true anomaly. My mind, now a finely tuned fraud detector, immediately knew what it was missing. The $50,000, the inheritance from my grandmother that was supposed to be a nest egg for my future, carefully designated for safekeeping by Mark, was gone. Not invested, not spent on a joint venture, but simply vanished from the account it was supposed to be in. The sudden rush of cold realization sent a shiver down my spine, more potent than any single betrayal thus far. I remembered the day the money came in, a bittersweet gift after losing my beloved grandmother. Mark had been so reassuring, so solicitous, insisting it be put into a separate high-interest savings account. Just for your future, Carolyn. You deserve it. I had trusted him. Completely. Believing it was a gesture of love and protection. Now, that trust lay in tatters, replaced by a chilling void. My fingers, numb but driven, moved quickly, tracing the digital breadcrumbs. The investment transfer wasn't to a legitimate fund. It was a direct wire to an account I didn't recognize, but whose name, after a few frantic cross-references, made my blood run cold. Jessica Peterson *. Not my sister's married name, but her maiden name. Her personal account, $50,000, siphoned directly from my inheritance, into her hands. The betrayal was so profound, so meticulously executed, it took my breath away. I immediately called Miss Albright. The time difference no longer a concern. Her calm voice was a lifeline as I relayed the discovery. $50,000, Miss Albright. To Jessica's account. My inheritance. There was a brief silence on her end, then a sharp, professional exhalation. Carolyn, this changes everything. Get everything you have related to that transfer and Jessica's accounts ready. We're going in deep. The next morning, Miss Albright and her forensic team worked with a relentless intensity. With access to Jessica's financial records, obtained through a carefully worded subpoena that cited suspected marital asset dissipation and potential fraud, the true picture began to emerge. The $50,000 had indeed landed in Jessica's account, but it didn't stay there. Within weeks, multiple smaller transfers began flowing from Jessica's account, not back to a joint account, but directly to Mark's personal, previously undisclosed accounts. These weren't small, sporadic payments. They were consistent, almost structured, indicating a deliberate, ongoing arrangement. The ultimate, sickening insult came with the final piece of the puzzle. A large sum, nearly half of the original inheritance, had been transferred from Jessica's account to a high-end jewelry store, followed by a transaction on Mark's newly opened credit card for an engagement ring. The date on the receipt for the ring coincided perfectly with Jessica's sudden venomous phone call, where she had declared Mark's love for her. And his choice. The pieces clicked into place, with horrifying precision. They hadn't just had an affair. They had systematically plundered my inheritance, using my money, to fund their illicit romance, and ultimately, to buy the symbol of their grotesque union. This wasn't just infidelity, a messy divorce, or even Mark's financial irresponsibility. This was a premeditated, calculated financial crime, orchestrated by two people who had once claimed to love me. One as a husband, the other as a sister. The sheer audacity, the depth of their depravity, was staggering. My blood ran cold, then boiled with a quiet, controlled rage. They weren't just lovers, they were co-conspirators. The money trail didn't just expose an affair. It unraveled a deeper, more insidious conspiracy to defraud me, to strip me not only of my husband and my family, but of my very financial future. Mark's sudden, desperate need for money in the emergency hearing now made chilling sense. He wasn't just destitute, he was leveraged, entangled in a web of deceit with my sister, desperate to keep their secret, and my money, hidden. The game had just escalated from a painful separation to a full-blown criminal investigation. And I, armed with the cold, hard facts, was ready to play. The cold, hard facts, once meticulously laid bare by Miss Albright and her team, didn't just expose Mark and Jessica's depravity. They cast a chilling retrospective light on another, even more agonizing truth. My mother's quiet, insidious complicity. Her silence, once interpreted as shock or sadness, now resonated as a deliberate act of concealment, a shield to protect her favored daughter from the consequences of her monstrous actions. It wasn't just my husband and my sister who had betrayed me. It was the woman who had given me life, who had nurtured me, who had now stood by, Knowing, as I was systematically dismantled, the realization was a second, deeper amputation, severing the last fragile ties to the family I thought I had. I remembered the phone calls in the initial days after Mark's text. My mother's hesitant questions, her quick changes of subject whenever Mark or Jessica's names arose, her anxious, "Are you sure you want to pursue this so aggressively, dear? Maybe it's best to just move on quietly." I had dismissed it as her usual aversion to conflict, a mother's desire for peace. Now it was a glaring admission of guilt, a passive participation in the grand deception. She hadn't just known about the affair, she had likely known about the stolen inheritance, chosen to shield her other child, allowing me to be ravaged while she pretended ignorance. The pain of this betrayal ran deeper than any other, a wound to the very core of my identity, staining the memories of a childhood I had once considered stable and loving. Then came the bitter clarity regarding Jessica. The money, the affair, the brazenness of it all. It wasn't solely greed that fueled her. It was a lifetime of simmering resentment, a festering jealousy that had finally erupted into this elaborate scheme. I saw it now, with the grim precision of an autopsy. Jessica, the younger sister, always a step behind, always striving for what she perceived as my easy successes. I remembered the year I got into my first-choice university with a scholarship, and Jessica, who hadn't gotten in, had subtly undermined my excitement, suggesting I was too serious for college life, or that my grades were just luck. Or the time Mark and I bought our first house, a modest but charming place, and Jessica had remarked, "It's nice, but it's no country estate, is it? Not like you always dreamed." She'd always had a way of dimming my light, of minimizing my achievements, as if my happiness somehow diminished her own. Her compliments were always backhanded, her support conditional. She wanted what I had, not because she truly desired it, but because she couldn't stand the idea of me having it. And now, she'd taken the most fundamental things: my husband, my inheritance, and the trust I had in my own flesh and blood. She hadn't just sought to steal, she sought to destroy, to obliterate the very foundations of my life, fueled by a twisted envy that had finally found its grotesque outlet. The cost of this truth was immense. I knew, with a certainty that was both chilling and liberating, that I could no longer allow these people any space in my life. My mother, who chose silence over justice, and my sister, who chose deceit over family loyalty, had forfeited their place. The decision was not made in a fit of rage, but with a quiet, resolute sadness. There would be no more phone calls, no more holiday gatherings, no more feigned politeness. The life I had known, the family unit I had clung to despite its flaws, was unequivocally shattered. But in its wreckage, I found a cold, hard strength. The truth, however brutal, had freed me, not just from a treacherous marriage, but from the insidious burden of familial deception. The ties that bound me to them were severed, cleanly and irrevocably. The heavy cost of truth was a new beginning, stripped bare of illusions, but fortified by an unyielding sense of self-preservation and an unshakable resolve for justice. That unshakable resolve found its most potent expression in Miss Albright's unwavering vision. She didn't just listen to my renewed determination. She honed it, sharpening every shard of betrayal and every piece of unearthed evidence into a surgical instrument of justice. She called her masterwork Project Nightingale, a name that hinted at both the hidden melody of truth and the devastating song of their unraveling. It was more than a mere collection of documents. It was a meticulously constructed narrative, a chronological exposé of Mark's and Jessica's deceit, financial fraud, and moral bankruptcy. Every forged signature, every suspicious transfer, every damning communication was woven into a tapestry of undeniable guilt, painstakingly cross-referenced and annotated with legal precedents and potential criminal charges. Our sessions, once filled with the raw emotion of discovery, now became highly strategic, almost clinical. Miss Albright, with an uncanny ability to dissect human psychology, meticulously planned every aspect of the upcoming settlement meeting. We anticipated Mark's desperate attempts at denial, Mr. Davies' frantic legal gymnastics, and even the potential for a last-minute emotional plea. "They will try to muddy the waters, Carolyn," she warned, her gaze sharp. "They will try to portray you as vengeful, as irrational. But we will meet their bluster with irrefutable facts. Their narrative will collapse under the weight of their own actions." We rehearsed responses, practiced projecting an aura of calm authority, and discussed the precise moment to unveil each devastating piece of evidence, like a seasoned conductor planning every crescendo of a symphony. My own emotional landscape had undergone a profound transformation. The initial tempest of shock, grief, and incandescent fury had gradually settled, leaving behind a deep, abiding, almost serene resolve. It wasn't anger that propelled me now, but a cold, unwavering clarity, a dispassionate pursuit of justice. The personal had transmuted into the procedural. I saw their downfall, not as an act of petty vengeance, but as the inevitable consequence of their choices, a necessary rebalancing of the scales. My accounting mind, once focused on orderly ledgers, now applied its methodical precision to the messy landscape of human deceit, finding a strange satisfaction in exposing every discrepancy. The pain hadn't vanished entirely, but it had receded, replaced by a steely sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of their reckoning. Preparing for the final confrontation became a ritual of mental fortification. I began to visualize the settlement meeting not as a desperate plea for recognition, but as a deliberate, controlled unmasking. I imagined their faces across the table, Mark's entitled indignation slowly dissolving into panicked disbelief, Mr. Davies' arrogant bluster dissolving into frantic damage control. I pictured the moment Miss Albright would calmly lay out Project Nightingale, watching their carefully constructed world implode, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating finality of undeniable truth. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about stripping away their lies, exposing the ugliness they had hidden, and forcing them to confront the magnitude of their betrayal. I would remain stoic, my silence louder than any accusation. Outside the stark walls of the legal battle, life at the office offered a different, invaluable kind of anchor. My colleagues, unaware of the full extent of the war I was waging, provided crucial moments of normalcy and connection. David, my boss, with his steady, no-nonsense professionalism, continued to entrust me with complex projects, affirming my competence and value in a world that felt otherwise upside down. Brenda, my cheerful colleague, still shared her latest weekend anecdotes and brought me my favorite coffee. Her simple, unshakable friendship, a quiet balm, their everyday presence, their uncomplicated trust, served as a poignant reminder that not all relationships were built on deceit, and that a future, free from the shadow of Mark and Jessica, was not only possible but already taking shape. Their support, unspoken yet profound, became a silent fortress against the lingering echoes of familial betrayal, reminding me that even amidst the wreckage, new foundations of trust could, and would, be built. The space between the meticulous planning of Project Nightingale and the actual settlement meeting stretched out, an oddly charged void filled with both a gnawing anxiety and a fierce, almost predatory anticipation. Each sunrise brought a fresh wave of quiet tension, a tightening in my chest that had become a constant companion. Yet it was not the tremor of fear, but the hum of a finely tuned machine preparing for its ultimate test. I continued my work at the office, maintaining the facade of composed professionalism, but my inner world was singularly focused on the impending confrontation, every waking moment dedicated to fortifying myself for the emotional and strategic battle ahead. I spent hours in quiet contemplation, replaying Miss Albright's words, visualizing the room, imagining Mark's face, Mr. Davies's bluster. It wasn't about reliving the hurt. It was about desensitizing myself to their presence, stripping them of any power they might still unconsciously hold over me. I practiced a stoic neutrality, a silent shield that would deflect their accusations and desperate pleas. The image of Mark, broken and desperate in the emergency hearing, flashed in my mind. But now it was colored by the knowledge of his deceit, making it easier to view him not as a wronged husband, but as a calculated adversary. There was no room for sentimentality, no space for the ghost of the man I once loved. Only the objective reality of the thief and the schemer remained. The weight of knowing I held all the cards was both exhilarating and sobering. Their future Mark's financial solvency, Jessica's freedom from criminal charges, their public reputations all hung precariously on the terms I had, with Miss Albright's guidance, dictated. It was a power I had never sought, a burden of responsibility I wouldn't have wished for, yet it was undeniably mine. This realization solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was lost, it was about ensuring accountability, about preventing them from ever inflicting such pain and damage on anyone else. Their desperate machinations had forged in me an unyielding sense of moral obligation. In the quiet hours of those final days, I often found myself reflecting on the person I had become. The Carolyn who had received that cold, terse text message felt like a distant acquaintance, almost a stranger. That woman had been complacent, trusting, perhaps a little naive beneath her meticulous exterior. The woman who now faced the mirror was sharper, leaner in spirit, undeniably stronger. The pain of betrayal had carved away layers of illusion, leaving behind a core of resilience and wisdom I hadn't known I possessed. I had navigated the treacherous waters of emotional devastation and systemic fraud, not only surviving but emerging with a clarity of purpose that transcended the anger. This wasn't merely about retribution. It was about rebirth, about reclaiming my narrative and asserting my inherent worth. The final strategy session with Miss Albright was held the evening before the meeting, a culmination of weeks of relentless work. Her office, usually a beacon of calm, thrummed with a focused energy. We meticulously reviewed every page of Project Nightingale, every piece of evidence, every potential legal angle. She outlined the sequence of revelations, the precise moment each damning piece of information would be presented, anticipating every possible counter-argument Mr. Davies might attempt. I had done my own final check of the financial documents, cross-referencing figures, ensuring every decimal point was accurate, every date meticulously recorded. There was a quiet intensity between us, a shared understanding of the gravity of what was to come. As I left her office that night, the city lights a blur through the car window, I felt a strange sense of peace. All the preparations were complete. The stage was set. Tomorrow, the truth would finally have its day. The conference room, a functional space with a long polished table and uncomfortable chairs, felt heavy with unspoken words. A vacuum before the storm. Miss Albright sat beside me, a pillar of calm in her severe gray suit, her hands clasped loosely before her, radiating an almost palpable readiness. The air crackled, taut with expectation. Then, the door opened. Mark entered first, his usual confident swagger replaced by a stiff, almost robotic gait. Beside him, Mr. Davies, his face a mask of practiced bluster that seemed a shade less convincing today. And then, Jessica. My sister. Her presence was a fresh stab of betrayal, sharper than any wound Mark had inflicted. She clung to Mark's arm, her eyes darting nervously around the room, settling on me with a flicker of defiance that quickly dissolved into something akin to fear. She was dressed in an expensive new-looking dress, my time's inheritance likely. The sight ignited a familiar cold burn in my gut, quickly suppressed. I met her gaze with an unblinking stoic stare, offering no flicker of recognition, no hint of the sister she once knew. It was a calculated emptiness, a wall between us. My mother was conspicuously absent, a silence that spoke volumes. They took their seats opposite us, the table a chasm, not merely a divider. Miss Albright waited until they were settled, a slight, almost imperceptible delay that amplified the tension. Then, she began. Her voice, usually calm and measured, now took on an edge of quiet authority that demanded attention. "Good morning, gentlemen, Miss Peterson. She acknowledged them with a nod that was more formality than respect. We're here today to discuss a resolution to the divorce proceedings between Carolyn Peterson and Mark Peterson. However, the scope of this discussion has, regrettably, expanded. She paused, her gaze sweeping across their faces, lingering briefly on Jessica. What we are presenting today is not merely a divorce settlement proposal. It is a comprehensive dossier we have termed Project Nightingale. She tapped a thick binder on the table, its pages filled with meticulously organized documents, each tabbed and cross-referenced. This project details not just marital asset division, but a calculated, ongoing pattern of financial fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, involving both Mark Peterson and Jessica Peterson. She didn't raise her voice, but each word landed with the force of a hammer blow. She started, calmly, surgically, laying out the evidence. The timeline of Mark's affair with Jessica, corroborated by phone records and digital communication. Then, the financial trail, the specific date and amount of my grandmother's inheritance, its illicit transfer to Jessica's account, and the subsequent funneling of funds to Mark's hidden accounts. She displayed bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, even the receipt for the engagement ring. Purchased with my times money, the evidence was presented with cold, undeniable logic, each fact building upon the last, forming an inescapable web. As Miss Albright spoke, Mark's face transformed from indignation to a ghastly pallor. His eyes, wide with disbelief, flickered between Miss Albright, the documents, and Jessica. Mr. Davies, initially attempting to interject with sputtering objections, quickly fell silent, his face draining of color as the sheer volume and irrefutability of the evidence became apparent. He began frantically flipping through his own sparse notes, as if hoping to find an escape route that wasn't there. Jessica, beside Mark, had gone completely rigid. Her defiant flicker was gone, replaced by a raw, naked terror. Her grip on Mark's arm tightened, her knuckles white. I could see her mouth open and close, but no sound emerged. She looked like a cornered animal, caught in the headlights of her own catastrophic choices. I remained silent, a still point in the storm brewing across the table. My eyes, unwavering, observed every minute shift in their expressions, the tightening of Mark's jaw, the frantic twitch in Mr. Davies' eye, the slow, dawning horror in Jessica's gaze. There was no triumph in my heart, no savage joy, only a profound, almost weary sense of clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was simply the truth, finally given voice. They had built their house of cards on deceit and betrayal, and now, it was collapsing under the weight of its own rotten foundation. My composure was absolute, a silent testament to the strength I had forged in the crucible of their treachery. Miss Albright concluded her presentation with a chillingly calm recitation of the potential criminal charges: fraud, embezzlement, grand larceny. She then presented our terms, itemized and non-negotiable: the full return of the stolen inheritance, forfeiture of all marital assets to me, full legal fees covered, and an agreement to abstain from any further contact. The alternative, she made clear, was a criminal investigation that would destroy their lives far more thoroughly than any divorce. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mr. Davies, finally regaining some semblance of control, leaned over, whispering urgently to Mark. Mark, visibly shaking, nodded weakly, his eyes fixed on the binder as if it held his death sentence. Jessica, still frozen, looked utterly broken. There was no fight left in them. They were trapped, exposed. We accept, Mr. Davies rasped, his voice hoarse, his shoulders slumped in defeat. All terms. We accept. The words were hollow, devoid of any genuine concession, yet they resonated with a deep, satisfying finality. Miss Albright nodded crisply, already pushing the detailed settlement agreement across the table for their signatures, as Mark's hand trembled, signing away everything he thought he had won. And Jessica watched, paralyzed by her complicity. A quiet, profound sense of vindication settled over me. It wasn't the catharsis of a raging fire, but the cold, steady glow of justice finally served. The truth had not just been heard. It had prevailed. The intricate, ugly web of deceit had been unraveled, thread by agonizing thread. And now, its architects stood utterly exposed, stripped bare of their lies and their ill-gotten gains. The battle was over. The war, however, had redefined me completely, leaving me not broken, but undeniably, powerfully whole. The ink on the settlement papers, still wet, sealed not just a legal agreement, but the definitive end of an era, and the quiet, almost anticlimactic beginning of another. The silence in the conference room after Mr. Davies's defeated "we accept" was profound, broken only by the rustle of paper as Miss Albright efficiently guided us through the final signatures. There was no theatrical exit, no fiery confrontation. Mark, his face pale and eyes vacant, signed mechanically, a puppet drained of defiance. Jessica, still clutching his arm, offered no eye contact. Her shoulders slumped, her earlier venom replaced by a palpable, pathetic brokenness. I signed with a steady hand, each stroke a deliberate act of self-reclamation. As they were ushered out, their retreating figures casting long shadows down the hallway, I felt not a surge of triumph, but a profound, weary exhalation. The fight was truly over, and I was free. Their downfall, though not witnessed firsthand, unfolded predictably. A slow, agonizing public unraveling. News of the settlement, carefully leaked through channels Miss Albright cultivated, painted a damning picture. The details of the stolen inheritance, the affair between a husband and his wife's sister, the attempted fraud. It all became fodder for whispers in our shared social circles and, eventually, a muted local news piece. Mark, stripped of his financial support and his reputation, found his vague business opportunities evaporate entirely. He was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the legal fees Miss Albright had ensured he would cover, a debt that would haunt him for years. Jessica, too, faced the bitter harvest of her choices. Her passionate affair, built on deceit and stolen money, quickly curdled under the weight of shared ruin. Without my inheritance to fund their lifestyle, without Mark's ability to charm and dissemble, their grotesque union dissolved into mutual resentment. I heard fragments from acquaintances, second-hand accounts of their public arguments, their increasingly desperate circumstances, their shared descent into obscurity and poverty. There was no joy in these reports, only a detached confirmation that justice, in its own slow and grinding way, had prevailed. They were no longer a part of my story, merely cautionary tales echoing from a life I had definitively left behind. My focus, fierce and unyielding, shifted entirely to rebuilding. The first step was finding a new home, not a grand house, but a bright, airy apartment, with large windows overlooking a small park, a space that felt entirely mine. It was smaller than the home Mark and I had shared, but it was infused with an incomparable sense of lightness and peace. I curated every piece of furniture, every painting, every plant, each item a deliberate choice reflecting the woman I was becoming. New routines emerged organically. Morning yoga on my balcony, quiet evenings spent reading, long walks in the park, rediscovering the simple rhythms of life unburdened by deceit. I even started taking pottery classes, molding raw clay into something beautiful and functional, a metaphor, I realized, for the reshaping of my own life. It was a tangible act of creation, a stark contrast to the destruction I had endured. The healing process was not a linear path, nor was it instantaneous. The anger, sharp and cold, still flared occasionally, a phantom limb ache reminding me of the amputated past. But slowly, gradually, it began to subside, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I allowed myself to feel the pain, to grieve not just for the marriage, but for the loss of my family, for the innocence I had shed. I talked to a therapist Miss Albright had recommended, unraveling the complex knots of betrayal, learning to forgive myself for having trusted too deeply. There were days of quiet solitude, of tears shed for what might have been. But even those moments were imbued with a sense of purpose, a necessary part of letting go. It was like tending a garden after a long winter. Slowly, painstakingly, I was clearing the debris, nurturing new growth, allowing the sun to warm the soil again. From the ashes of that brutal war, I emerged not only intact but profoundly transformed. The lessons learned were etched deep into my soul. The insidious nature of misplaced trust, the fierce power of resilience, and the unshakable truth of self-worth. I learned that my value was not derived from a relationship or from the approval of others, but from my own integrity, my own strength. I learned to trust my instincts, to listen to the quiet warnings that had once been overridden by complacency. And most importantly, I learned that even in the face of the darkest betrayal, it was possible not just to survive, but to thrive, to build new foundations stronger and more authentic than anything that had existed before. The bitter regrets of a past life were slowly fading, replaced by the quiet, unwavering certainty of a self-possessed future. The sun, unfiltered and generous, poured into my apartment each morning, no longer merely illuminating the dust motes of a life half-lived, but warming the vibrant pulse of a reality entirely my own. My coffee, once a quiet accomplice to routine, was now a deliberate pleasure, savored on the balcony amidst the thriving rosemary and mint. These were the small, profound moments, the quiet victories that anchored my days, moments devoid of the gnawing anxiety that had once masqueraded as peace. My hands, once trembling from betrayal, now found steady purpose in shaping clay, in coaxing form from raw earth. Each vessel, unique and imperfect, was a tangible testament to resilience, a physical manifestation of a life meticulously rebuilt, not from shattered remnants, but from a profound understanding of what truly endured. Mark and Jessica, the twin specters of my past, had dissolved into the realm of distant memory, their once potent names now carrying no more weight than forgotten headlines. I no longer traced the echoes of their ruin. Their fate was a closed book, its pages irrelevant to the unfolding narrative of my own making. The raw, gut-wrenching pain had transmuted, not into indifference, but into a quiet, unshakable certainty. My worth was not contingent on their malice, nor my future dictated by their choices. My journey hadn't been a return to a former self, but an evolution into someone entirely new, sculpted by fire and forged by truth. The meticulously structured chaos of an accountant's life still appealed, but now it was balanced by an inner spaciousness, a willingness to embrace the unquantifiable joys. I cultivated connections that felt genuine, chose passions that resonated, and learned to trust the quiet compass of my own heart. This wasn't merely survival, it was a deliberate, joyful act of creation. The past, with its brutal lessons and undeniable scars, served not as a prison, but as a bedrock. And from this solid ground, I looked out, not with apprehension, but with the quiet, exhilarating knowledge that the most beautiful stories are often written on pages once thought to be irrevocably stained, brimming now with the promise of endless, authentic beginnings.